Can't you see? Everyone! They're here already! You're next!
Let's go!
Welcome to the future, where the glass is half full and you'll need new glasses, where you'll be jumping from conclusions.
The past is annulled, and a new future is born.
Never before in history has so much meant so little to so many. AD on the radio.
So, when you were a kid, when you were growing up, as you were making your way in the world, trying to figure things out, trying to figure out who you were and what you thought of the things around you, chances are your parents were probably influence number one. And hopefully you had involved parents that did that. But in addition to parents, I really hope that you were fortunate enough to have had someone outside. That can be so important, because at some point when you're a kid, you turn around to your parents and go, I can't stand you. I want nothing more than to be out of your house. It's just a part of growing up. That's when having, it could be anyone. Could be an aunt or an uncle, maybe an older cousin. It could be a teacher. It could be a coach, sort of an authority figure in your life. I really hope you had one, maybe more than one of those when you were growing up, because it's so important. It's so important to have a sounding board. So important to have something in addition to your parents that helps you form your worldview. And ideally, that's going to be a teacher. I was really lucky. I had several of those. Whether it was someone like my art teacher who was like, you could be really good at this if you wanted to be. Hey, you know how I said you could be really good at this if you wanted to be? That doesn't work if you're lazy the way you are working. It was a great lesson in the fact that, talent, which I was told that I was blessed with, wasn't anywhere near enough to make your way in the world. And look, ultimately, it was a matter of getting a B or an A in a high school art class. It wasn't a matter of, I didn't become an artist. You can't go look at my oil paintings in galleries or anything, but it was the thing that they taught me about work. The fact that work was necessary, no matter how much talent you have been told you had. Not special. You're not special in your talent. You're special in your ability to put your talent, your work ethic together. Got that great message from Mrs. Vikapel, my art teacher. She was awesome. And then there was Mr. Reaney. He was my jazz workshop teacher. He was the guy who, when I was supposed to go to New England Conservatory of Music and they rejected me because of my inability to sight read music, he wrote them a letter and he was like, it's wrong that you don't accept this guy. I will work really hard with him so that his sight reading is up to snuff. And you have to know that this is a tremendous musician in the making. You got to accept him. That's wrong. He wrote them this letter. They responded. They let me in and said, okay, you got a year to improve your sight reading. Go to town. Unbelievable. Unbelievable that somebody stepped up to the plate for me that wasn't related to me, that was just my teacher. So fortunate. And then there was Mr. Daniels, my AP English teacher. Gave me the 1A plus that any AP English teacher had ever given a student in my school. And he made me work for it. And he pushed me. And, well, he really got out in front of a lot of things. I was really, really fortunate in that respect. And I hope you had those people in your lives too. And I hope that your parents helped you form a worldview. And I hope that your parents didn't try and hide things from you. Because life is this impossible thing. Life is this insurmountable task. There's going to be things that get away. There's going to be, when you are raising a child or when you're a child making your way in the world, there's got to be stuff that people don't explain to you, stuff that you are ill prepared to deal with. Doesn't matter how much your parents try and teach you. Doesn't matter how much your teachers try and teach you about life, making your way in the world, all of the above. There's going to be situations that you run into where you're like, I got no idea what to do here. But hopefully they've given you the tools to deal with those situations. And I think one of those tools is not shielding you from the way the world is. Which is why I'm kind of iffy on this whole thing that happened in, Duluth, Minnesota, where the schools decided To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn from their required reading list because of racial slurs. I remember I was a reader when I was a kid. The summers were spent at the library. So there was a summer reading list, which I never even freaking touched because I was too busy reading other books. And I felt it was a great indignity that I was suffering through, that I was being dictated to how to spend my reading time. But when you have a kid that's a reader, back in the day, or when you have a kid with an internet connection in 2018, which is literally all of them, you as a teacher or you as a parent, really it falls to the parents, have to get out in front of some of this information and explain this stuff. And I remember reading older books and saying, that's weird. Why is this gross caricature of a black person in this book? And my parents had a long talk with me and said, things were very different then. Doesn't make it okay. This is how people that were not white were viewed by some segments of society during the time that this book was written. And it's horrible and it's sad, and we have to learn from it. And it was actually a very interesting learning experience, and I think brought me closer to being a person that made equality a very big priority in life.
Real radio.
104.1.
Where the left and right come together for fundamental truths. AD on the radio, on Twitter at ADSXE.
So you got to get out in front of these things. You really do. There's no way you can shield your child from life and the things in life. Now, look, do I understand the idea that schools are pulling To Kill a Mockingbird and Huckleberry Finn from their required reading list because of racial slurs? This is a situation. And to be fair, I understand where this comes from. The district's director of curriculum and instruction, Michael Carey, said that the district's intent is to be considerate of all of its students and that they owe it to its students to not subject them to a racial slur that marginalizes them in their required learning. Carey says, we felt that we could still teach the same standards and expectations through other novels that didn't require students to feel humiliated or marginalized by the use of racial slurs. Excellent point. There are many books out there that are good that do not contain these words in them. But I'll never forget that experience I was telling you about. Delving into literature, finding books in public libraries and in old dusty cabinets at garage sales. Like, books have been around for a long time, and people have been saying and doing effed up stuff in books forever. You know, you're taught that reading is a super important thing, and it is a super important thing. And oh my gosh, read makes such a difference. You'll feel your mind come alive. If you're one of those people that gets caught up where you spend a lot of time reading your Facebook feed, or you don't have time to read a book because, you know, life is crazy and we're all working 18 jobs to try and survive, I totally understand that. But if you just take 5 to 10 minutes of your day that you would be leafing through a Facebook feed or something of that nature and read a book, I guarantee you, and it has to be a good one. Don't waste your time on something that isn't igniting your particular fire. But I guarantee you're going to feel your mind come alive in a way that maybe you haven't felt it being alive in a while. And it's a good feeling. But reading, while it is a wonderful, important, vital thing, is really still something where you stand the risk of being exposed to some garbage. And sometimes it's great literature that contains the garbage of the day. It was an important learning lesson. It was an important lesson for me to learn, rather, when I read these books and I saw these things. And I went to my parents and said, what's going on with this stuff? And they're like, hey, that was written in the 1800s. That was written in the early 1900s. That was written during a time where people believed horrible things. They used horrible words, and words that they didn't even necessarily realize were horrible at the time. It was just the word that absolutely everyone was using. There's people that were so unbelievably progressive when it came to the idea of equality, like Mark Twain, who used language in books like Huckleberry Finn that, I get it. I understand why a student might read that, not necessarily understand what's going on, and just see the word and be so attuned to the hurt that comes with that word when it's used in their everyday life that it's a painful thing to read it. I get it. I do understand it. But the thing is, you can't shield a child from life. And I also understand why a school would take this stance. I really do. Because, look, they're opening themselves up to criticism and lawsuits and all sorts of different stuff by having these books in their curriculum, and they don't need the hassle. They don't need the headache. They're teachers. They make almost no money a year to do the things that they do. They're buying their own school supplies, and they don't need some angry parent screaming at them because they're reading the work of Mark Twain, and Mark Twain contains the work of Mark Twain contains a word that upset and offended their children, and they're upset and they're offended. And like, you know what? There's other books that don't contain these words. It's just going to make our lives easier. Believe me, I understand and I sympathize to how this decision was made. I really do. Superintendent Bill Gronseth said that the Duluth School District was hearing from students that the book's use of the racial slur created an uncomfortable atmosphere for them in the classroom. The local chapter of the NAACP applauded the decision, saying the literary classics are just hurtful and use hurtful language that has oppressed the people for over 200 years. One of the books that was taken off the required reading list was To Kill a Mockingbird. Maybe the NAACP doesn't really realize what To Kill a Mockingbird is all about. Maybe there's language in there that is hurtful. And while I get the fact that the school district just wants an easy life and they don't want the X factor of having these incredible books that really were at their time and still today, when you look at it in their context, To Kill a Mockingbird, Huckleberry Finn, these books are champions of equality, champions of thought, unbelievably forward thinking, and struck blows against injustice when they came out. I can understand. But please, if you're in a similar situation with your kids, get out in front of it. Explain to them. Explain to them the context. This is where teachers are maybe not necessarily the best folks to do this because, like I said, they're making no money a year. They've got to pay for their own school supplies. They don't need the additional headache. They don't need the additional man hours of having to explain the context to people and then still have people have their feelings hurt. It's too freaking much for them. But don't deny your child, A, the ability and the opportunity to enjoy this literature, and don't deny them the learning experience that comes from the mistakes of the past. It's vitally important that we learn from the past so that we can evolve past the things that might hold us as a society back. Specifically read Huckleberry Finn and read To Kill a Mockingbird. Read them to your children. Refresh yourself on what the hell it is they mean. Because if they're not going to be taught in schools, if they're not books that kids are going to learn in schools, well, we are all, and I do mean all of us, every last one of us moving forward, going to be missing out.
None higher, circus in the age, call me sire. Think you're gonna be the one to take me down and guess again? No. Whoa. Money making, skills on the mic, keep me paid every day. And you're part of the battle, just bow down, better act like you know. Whoa. Come on.
For more stimulation and less irritation, 9 out of 10 doctors choose KPRC AM 950, Houston's more stimulating talk radio.
Don't get the blues, get all the news. We mean all of you guys out there in Radio Land. All aboard!
So, it's kind of interesting.
He's back. AD on the radio.
Give it up, yeah. Give it up, yeah. Bring this on,
Going to the store, purchasing a compact disc, saving up your allowance, babysitting or lawn mowing money, and how much were CDs back in the day, Travis?
God, I want to say they were like almost $15. Like if you could get a cheap one for like $9.99-ish, but I think the new ones, weren't they like $15 or $16?
Oh yeah, I think it was something like that. I remember being at like Best Buy or something like that and being like, oh my gosh, 3 CDs for $30.
Yeah.
Take my money.
Was like
I got BC Boys for $9.99. I'm going to put this in my Discman and walk down the street with it held in the palm of my hand because I can't put it sideways.
Oh, you didn't have the fancy Discman with the anti-skip protection.
They never worked, and I did eventually get an anti-skip Discman, and it was slightly better, but it never really panned out the way it was supposed to. Also, the Discman was like the most cumbersome, uncomfortable thing to carry around.
Oh, it was terrible.
There was like, if you wear sort of like combat pants with those big pockets or cargo pants that, to be fair, people were wearing a lot of in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was room in those pants, or those big parachute pants that everybody was wearing. What were the UFO pants? Did you have a pair of those?
I did not, but they wouldn't, that machine would not fit in a standard pocket.
Yeah, it wouldn't fit in a standard pocket. And here's the thing. If you put it in your parachute pants pocket, or you put it in your cargo pants pocket, the average headphone cable wasn't really long enough to deal. So you'd be walking down the street being like, this is all right. Click, it falls out. Damn it. Right in the middle of your favorite song. It was just a no-win situation.
You know what I absolutely loved, and I never got into it, and I'm still regretful of it. I was looking into it the other day. Mini discs. Did you ever have mini discs?
Mini discs were kind of like Betamax. And honestly, people in the music community were all about mini discs, because mini discs were, for those that don't know, they were like, well, exactly what they sound like, miniature CDs, but they were in a protective casing so that they could not really be scratched. They were fantastic little sort of like pieces of media, and the mini disc recorders and players were about the size of, I don't know, like a silver dollar or something. They were really small, so it was like very space age to have this, but for whatever reason, it didn't catch on. It was like,
no.
Do people still buy Blu-ray? Nobody buys Blu-ray, right?
Blu-ray? Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure anybody who would buy a DVD would. Yeah, people buy Blu-ray. I'm trying to think. The engineer on my tugboat came in with some Blu-ray CD, like Blu-ray discs, to watch on the boat, because like a lot of the tugboats don't have internet. So he goes to like Walmart in the Blu-ray bin for like $9 and gets
right. Okay, I get it now, because the tugboat doesn't have internet. I was like, who the hell actually wants these, these pieces of media that are essentially coasters when you could just stream it from literally any service in the world? To me, Blu-ray and mini disc are kind of the same thing, in that they're superior forms of media that should have been wildly successful, but for whatever reason never really caught on. You know why Betamax never caught on?
But what it was, I'm trying to remember. Was it the lobby between Betamax and VHS? Was it essentially forced out? I'm trying to remember what the deal was. I remember there's some big like dramatic story about it.
Well, the quality of Betamax was infinitely superior to that of VHS, and everyone was like, well, everyone's going to want the quality. There you go. Well, it was also a little bit cheaper to produce content and crank out VHS tapes. And you know how I said the other day that I enjoy following adult entertainers on Twitter for several reasons. One, boobs. Two, a lot of them are our friends that have been on the show. And three, it's a learning experience for anyone in media, because at the moment a new form of social media comes out, the moment a new form of any media comes out, the very first people to figure out how to monetize it are those in the adult entertainment business. And the adult entertainment folks realized that they could crank out VHS tapes way quicker and easier than they could produce Betamax tapes. And it was because of porn, VHS became the industry standard. And that's sort of like widely accepted as an economic fact. The adult entertainment industry was the death of Betamax. Betamax was a superior quality product. Betamax should have succeeded for every reason, but because the porn industry decided to make VHS tapes and nobody actually wanted to go watch their adult entertainment in theaters anymore, everyone just got themselves a VHS player as opposed to a Betamax player, because that's what you had to have if you were going to watch naughty movies at home without the benefit of a projector.
Oh my! Now tell me this: have you ever physically handled a laser disc? I don't know what the downfall, I don't know what caused laser discs to not happen. Essentially, if it was something porn related, but man, those things were huge. Have you ever? I've never touched one. Did you ever touch one?
Yeah, and I was at a relative's house. I'm like, what are all those things? Like, what are those things that are the size of LP records?
Seriously,
but have movie titles. He's like, oh, those are laser discs. Yeah, we've got many titles. Feel free to watch any of them. You just pop it in the machine. It takes the disc out, and when you're done, it goes back in the protective casing, and you don't even have to touch it. And it was, it was an enormous precursor to a DVD, as best as I could tell. But that was, I don't even know when those things came out. When was that? Was that an 80s thing?
Yeah, it was an 80s thing. It was early 80s, and I think it probably stuck around until probably mid 80s or so.
Wow. Yeah. So, I watched some movies on a Laserdisc, and I can't remember. I think I tried to rewind some of it once, and it didn't work all that well. And I was like, where's the VHS tape? What's going on? The rewind and pause buttons became very important to a young boy in the late 80s, because, you know, you do things like you would tape Trading Places off of TV, or you would tape The Woman in Red off TV, which, as any good 80s, 90s adolescent will tell you, contained brief moments of complete nudity. Jamie Lee Curtis was naked in Trading Places, and everybody wore out the pause button on that movie. And then The Woman in Red, Kelly LeBrock, was fully naked for like just, you know, not even a second, teeny fraction of a second, but like I found the pause and rewind buttons in laser discs to be borderline useless in that capacity. Whereas, you know, my trusty old VHS, that got the job done. Oh, that got the job done.
I'll tell you what I saw the other day that made me, you want to talk about like nostalgic. Like I really wanted this. It was and I know most people like listen to music and stuff. If you actually had MP3s, or you still listen to MP3s or whatever, you know, you'd listen to it on your iPhone or your Android or whatever. But I saw a MP3 player. This was so cool, man. I almost bought it, but I think it was like $80. It was an MP3 player, the shape of a cassette tape, and it had cool. It had a little display on it, and like a place that you could plug it in with a, you know, USB cord to move your music over and stuff. But the cool thing about it was, it said that if you put it into a cassette tape player, most tape players would actually play it.
That's awesome, because that's awesome. That's so great, because it was a badge of honor that my SUV lasted as long as it did. But up until about this time last year, I drove a 2002 with a tape deck in it, and the odometer broke at around 200,000 miles. I'm guessing there was probably close to 350,000 miles on this thing. And it had a tape deck in it. It also had a 6-disc changer in the glove box. But I had one of those things, you know, so I could hook my phone into it. Those tapes, you know, like you put it, and so it had a tape deck in it. And I used to actually get a big kick out of going to what's that secondhand bookstore in Montrose? What is it?
Oh, is it
Half Price Books? I think it was called. So
Half
Price Books
those are all
would
over.
have they would have all these really fantastic audiobooks on tape for like 25 cents, because who the hell has a tape player anymore? Answer, I did. So I loved it. It was freaking great. I got to, and you know, I mean, now it's obviously borderline pointless. And when I would listen to stuff on my phone, I would do it by plugging the headphone cord, plugging the tape. You know, that, you know what I'm talking about, right? The tape that you put in your tape deck, and then you could hook it up to your CD player. That's what people, because cars with a CD player back in the, I don't know, who knows what time period cars started getting CD players as standard was. But if your car didn't have a CD player, you would have one of those tapes that went into your tape deck with a little headphone cable that came out of it that you could plug into your CD player. And that's what I would plug my phone into when I was driving down the road. But an MP3 player that you can put into a tape deck, and that's awesome. I would buy one of those. They couldn't take my money fast enough if I still had a tape deck. That's so great. I never even saw that. That's awesome.
I know. Well, I know what to get you for Christmas. It's called a mixtape. MIXX mixtape. And I don't have a tape player, and I actually love cassette tape players, but I don't have a tape player. But I actually really want this thing just because it's just so cool. Is it worth $80? Probably not.
The guy who I share an office with at one of the radio stations I work for, he programs a hip hop station, and he got a promotional tape deck boombox as part of, like, I don't know the artist. Maybe it's Fetty Wap or something like that. Like, you know, they send you all this crap to try and make their music and their musicians more memorable, and most of it's garbage. But I was like, you got a boombox? He's like, I know, it's awesome, and it came with a tape to listen to his new single on. I was like, that's freaking great.
That is awesome.
And he was like, it also plays MP3s. And I was like, that is, oh my God, I want that so much. But yeah, no, it's insane. That was so freaking cool. Anyways, the reason we're having this conversation is because there's a list of things that we miss because they've been replaced by technology. And it's a beautiful, amazing walk down memory lane. We'll get into it in just a little bit. Before we do that, there's pretty apropos. Here's comedian Sean Walsh talking about how it used to be when people had to download music instead of streaming it.
Children today are living the childhood I dreamt of. They want to hear a song, touch, they stream it, they got it, now, bang, instantly. They don't know the pain of LimeWire. Yeah. Start downloading a song, go to school, come back, hope that it had finished. That download bar messing with you. 4 minutes left. 9 hours and 28 minutes left. 30 seconds left. 52 hours and 38 minutes left. Just tell me the truth. This is before downloading music was legal. You could go to jail. What are you in here for? Murder. You? Possession of heroin. You? Downloading Limp Bizkit, rolling.
Do you remember there was mp3.com? Do you remember that website, Travis?
I do. I never used it.
It was really early streaming radio. At first, it was just a place to have, guys, you don't know this, but you can take your CD and you can turn it into a digital file called an MP3. You can learn all about it at mp3.com. And then there started to be playlists, and then there started to be mp3.com radio stations where people would have their playlists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it was like, honestly, an amazing idea and a precursor to everything that's going on now. Technically the folks that put up mp3.com should be gazillionaires. And if they're not, I feel truly sorry for them because, the iHeartRadios of this world, the Pandoras, the Spotifys, all the streaming services that are out there. It's an idea that they had, and it was so clunky and unrefined at the time, and people were too dunderheaded to understand the technology. But really, really, they were so far ahead of the curve. Too smart and too cool for the room. I feel bad for them. So here's more from Sean Walsh's bit about downloads before the age of streaming.
This was a time, not only did you have to hope that the song you were downloading would eventually complete downloading, you had to hope that that song was the song you intended on downloading.
Do you remember that? You would download and it would take a day and a half and you'd be so frustrated because it wasn't what the hell it was supposed to be. All right.
Infuriating. You know that they would intentionally release them, and it would have the head and the tail on it, but it would just have CD skip sounds. I was in a store the other day, and I guess it was downloaded MP3s they were playing over the speakers. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the song, you'd hear and I was like, I know where that music came from.
So it was actually, Madonna's so brilliant and so clever. Madonna put out a new album in the age of downloading where it was really a thing, and record labels were still dunderheaded enough to believe that they could get out in front of it and stop people from using the internet. So naive, so freaking stupid.
Right.
Madonna did this thing where everyone was like, new Madonna got leaked online, and everybody quickly went and downloaded it. And when you downloaded it, it was Madonna going, what the F do you think you're doing? Gotcha. It was which I thought was kind of cool. It was funny, and it created a decent little bit of press for her album. But now it just seems like such dated stuff.
Sometimes you just know you're done. You're longing for that shining sun. You walk these streets most every day. You're waiting to get washed away. Radio. Radio. 104.1.
Now, more AD on the radio.
So I guess the reason we've been talking about this is because, there's this amazing list of things that we missed because they've been replaced by technology, which we'll get into a little bit later on in the show. Right now, though, let's take one last listen to Sean Walsh, who's freaking genius, talking about when downloading began.
This was a time, not only did you have to hope that the song you were downloading would eventually complete downloading, you had to hope that that song was the song you intended on downloading. Imagine that now on iTunes, the latest Ed Sheeran single. Click on it to get a video of a horse on a man. We don't appreciate when something's finished downloading anymore. We don't. We take it for granted. We see that buffering now. We're like, come on, hurry up. I've got nothing to do soon. I remember the first time I downloaded a film. Took a week. Because my mum needed to use the phone. We downloaded X-Men 2. After 7 days, complete. Please be X-Men 2, please. 20th Century Fox fades. X-Men 2 comes up. We've done it. We're not taking it for granted. We're actually hugging. Yes, we've done it. This is the future. We look at the screen. Wolverine turns around. Ching.
Did you used to download movies?
Yeah, I did. It's funny because when I was
When you were a kid.
Yeah. And when I became a police officer, like, you have to take a polygraph. I remember I wasn't doing so well on the polygraph, which is funny because I literally was not lying about anything. And the polygrapher was like, okay, what I need to know, he's like, your like theft questions are very confusing. He's like, your responses. And I was like, dude, seriously, I don't steal anything. I said, but I will tell you, I said, man, probably like 5-10 years ago, I said, I did download music and movies. I said, and I've been worried about that ever since I knew I was going to have to take this polygraph because, like, is it theft? Isn't it theft? I said, I think it's, civil copyright law. I said, as opposed to, going to prison law. I said, but it's just one of those things that it really bothers me. And he kind of looked at me and he goes, okay, I don't need to know about your downloading. That's not a big deal. And I was like, well, I feel really bad about it.
Yeah, tell that to Lars Ulrich.
Oh my God, exactly. He'll sue the pants off of you.
Well, I mean, there were a couple of, there were, cases here and there where people were made an example of where
I knew somebody.
Like massive fines, jail time, all the above for like doing what literally every college kid was doing.
Exactly.
And and they were made an example of, and I don't think it really slowed anyone down at all whatsoever.
No. Yeah, I felt...
You knew someone that went to jail for downloading music?
No, I
movies?
knew somebody who, and I'm trying to remember who he was. I met him surfing, and like we were friends for like a while. Now I couldn't even tell you his name. I can't remember who he was, but I remember like right when I met him, he was dealing with this case. The RIAA was suing him, and they offered him a settlement out of court. He had to pay like $5,000 to him and agree to never download again. Like,
wow,
I know, it was crazy.
I'll never forget being a kid venturing through the streets of Camden Town in London, which was kind of like the, I don't know, bohemian rock and roll area of London. And, when I became a pro musician, it's where I played all the greatest shows of my life. And there was a big marketplace there, and there was definitely a vibe there. And, the idea that there was a little bit of danger and rock and roll in the air was definitely one of the appeals of Camden Town. And one of the things that gave Camden Town the appeal of a little danger and illicit activity is on the streets, selling out of like suitcases and stuff, were a bunch of folks, from whom you could buy bootlegs. Now, the bootlegs were not usually, interestingly enough, they weren't copies of CDs that had been put onto tapes, and they weren't, burned CDs and things of that nature, of actual albums. They were concert bootlegs. So a band would play the night before, and the next day on the street, there would be bootlegged recordings for sale. Like you could buy, Pearl Jam played last night. You want a tape of the show? You want a CD of the show? 10 pounds, please. Like, and it was a big thing in that respect. And there were stories of folks like Axl Rose, when Guns N' Roses were playing, seeing a red light go on in the audience, jumping into the crowd and punching a person who he saw with a tape recorder or a video camera, because the idea of protecting the band and the intellectual property, he didn't want those bootlegs on the streets, for any number of reasons. One, because it was taking money out of the band's pocket. Two, because he hadn't approved it. It didn't necessarily, he didn't know, you had no control over the quality, but these bootlegs were on the streets, and musicians would physically fight you to try and get like the tape you were making back. Cut to now, what happens at a show? Literally everybody whips out their phone and records the vast majority of it and uploads it to every last form of social media, and there's nothing artists can do about it. They just have to accept it. But the part of Axl Rose that jumped into a mosh pit once and beat somebody up because they had a tape recorder out recording the performance, I gotta tell you, I sort of relate to. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where the quality of your work is your calling card, and if somebody's taking a subpar recording of something and you're not prepared to be recorded, and like, it's a whole different state of mind when maybe you're having an off night with your vocals and you don't want the world thinking that, you know, you sound like that always. But if that bootleg circulates the globe a couple times, which it very well could, then what, you know? And so I totally understand it. And now musicians and all of us really have to understand that at any given time, no matter what we're doing, no matter what we're saying, we could be recorded. You know what I mean? It's just such a different day and age. It's fascinating stuff.
It's funny to look at it and go, wow, we literally went 360 degrees from, you know, from doing everything we could to keep those devices out of the show to all of a sudden now you can't, because it's such a part of life that no matter what you do, you can't prevent people from recording. It's so funny because I heard somebody once talk about a cell phone, and they said, you know, if at some point I told you you're going to use your phone to take pictures, you would have looked at me like you were crazy, because who in the world would take a picture with their phone? But look at it now. That's almost the main use of it.
Totally. Like, sure, right. I'm going to take a picture with my fork next, I bet you're telling me. How about this potato? Can this potato take a picture? Because apparently phones can't, future man.
It's true, though.
It is 100% completely true.
This feels
Leave the stimulation to the professionals.
Everyone is so smart.
KPRC, more stimulating talk radio.
There's something happening here, and you should know what it is. The dumbing up of America. Now, more AD on the radio.
So, a little later on, before we get out of here, we're going to discuss this list of the top 10 things that we miss because they've been replaced by technology. Now, what do you miss that's been replaced by technology? I'm just curious. Tweet me at ADSXE. Weigh in. We'll get into it. As soon as we roll through the news, Travis Golightly, what is going on in the world?
Quincy Jones revealed in an interview that he once dated Ivanka Trump.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, Quincy Jones has had an awful lot to say recently. Quincy Jones said he dated Ivanka Trump. He also said that Richard Pryor had sex with Marlon Brando, and that the Beatles were terrible musicians. He did an interview, another one. This guy does not hold back in any way, shape, or form. Here are the highlights, as I understand them. Marlon Brando had sex with Richard Pryor and Marvin Gaye, saying, quote, Brando was the most charming blankety blanker you ever met. He'd blankety blank anything. He'd blankety blank a mailbox.
Wow.
Yeah. He's a verbose individual, this Quincy Jones. James Baldwin, Richard Pryor, Marvin Gaye, he didn't care. And if it sounds like crazy sensationalism, and if you're not convinced, Richard Pryor's widow told TMZ that Quincy is telling the truth, and Richard wouldn't have cared that information is out there. So yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, and like Travis said, Quincy dated Ivanka Trump. It supposedly happened about 12 years ago, saying, quote, she's a fine blankety blanker. She had the most beautiful legs I ever saw in my life. Wrong father, though.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Quincy's not a big fan of our current president. He said, I used to hang out with him. He's a crazy blankety blanker. And he said that he's limited mentally, a megalomaniac, and narcissistic. I can't stand him.
Wow.
At what point did the world start hanging on every single word Quincy Jones said? I mean, here's the thing. Some of it's actually tremendously interesting because, you know, Quincy Jones is famous for a lot of stuff. He's a legendary music producer and an artist and a musician and all these sorts of things. But he also said that Michael Jackson was a thief. He said Michael Jackson was a thief. He said Michael stole a lot of stuff. He stole a lot of songs. Now, have you ever heard Donna Summer's State of Independence?
I have not.
All right, let's see if I can get this to play without the... Yep. So what he's saying is that bass line sounds a lot like... You got to admit there's more similarities and differences, and if Quincy Jones says Michael Jackson stole it from Donna Summer, I'm going to go out and guess that it's kind of true. He said, the notes don't lie, man. He was as Machiavellian as they come. Quincy also said Michael refused to give one of his writers on Don't Stop Till You Get Enough a songwriting credit. And here's the thing, Michael Jackson was a complicated guy that did horrible, terrible things. He was, and that's not really up for debate anymore. But there was this image that he was just this sort of like this artist. He was a businessman. You know, him and Paul McCartney used to be besties, and then he told Paul McCartney once, he was like, I'm going to buy all your songs. And Paul McCartney went, yeah, all right, Michael, haha, whatever. And then he did. Michael Jackson owned the publishing rights to all these Beatles songs, and he did it in kind of a surreptitious, sneaky, underhanded way, where Paul McCartney, who was supposed to be his friend, was hoping to purchase the Beatles catalog back and reclaim ownership of it because of some shady, there was some shady business dealings early on in the Beatles' career where they lost the rights to their own music, and Paul McCartney was hoping to get him back. Michael Jackson, who was supposed to be his friend, swooped in and got him first. So he was a sneaky dude.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Quincy Jones also said that the Beatles were terrible musicians. He said they were the worst musicians in the world. They were no playing mother blankety blankers. Paul was the worst bass player I ever heard, and Ringo, don't even talk about it. But he did say that Ringo's a great guy. Well, I mean, here's the thing. With the Beatles, I don't think anyone was ever of the opinion that they were the most technically accomplished musicians in the world, but they wrote songs that made the whole world sing. He also said he knows who killed JFK. Did you see this?
No, and there is no way. Did he say who it was?
Yes. He said who it was. He said it was Chicago mobster Sam Giancana. I don't know anything about Chicago mobster Sam Giancana, but you can bet people are Googling the living bejesus out of him right now. He talked about a link between Kennedy, Giancana, and Frank Sinatra, but then he shut the whole thing down, saying, quote, we shouldn't talk about this publicly.
That's weird, man.
He's coming out swinging, saying a bunch of incendiary stuff. Maybe it's an attention grab. Who the hell knows why he decided to sit down and have this interview and say some truly scandalous things and shoot absolutely from the hip. Who knows what someone's motivation for doing something like this is.
You know why I think it's an attention grab? Because he pulled that number that, I need to tell you about you know what? I probably shouldn't be talking about this. Never mind. You don't bring something up like that.
It's the interview equivalent of vague booking. You know, like that thing where people go, I'm so depressed, and they want all their friends on Facebook to go, why? God. You know, like, or please pray for me. Oh gosh,
this is the worst day in the world. I can't believe this happened.
all that stuff, which is just, I can't stand it. I understand why. Look, people are starved for attention, and we've had conversations on this that have lasted for hours. But in this day and age of digital technology that's supposed to bring us together, bridge gaps of understanding, and all of the above, and make us feel like we're supported. You know how you can feel the most alone in the biggest crowd? Well, the internet is the biggest crowd that's out there, and people can feel terribly isolated and alone. And that's why you do stupid stuff for attention, because you feel like you need to connect in some way and you're not. And I don't like people that do it, but I understand how it happens in 2018. And it's something that we really have to address, and it's a long show in and of itself. But the vague bookie aspect to what he's doing sort of says to me it's an attention grab, and it's sort of Trumpy. You know, Donald Trump will imply something and be like, of course, you know, there's something I could tell you about that guy, but perhaps that's for another time. Like, that's a total Trump move. Maybe it's something that just old rich dudes like to do, you know? Like,
maybe he saw Trump doing it and he's like, you know what? I'm going to start doing it. Yeah. And I'm going to see if it gets me the attention that it gets him.
I don't know. I don't understand it. But, like, also you got to bear in mind, like, I don't know how Quincy Jones is probably like 100 years old now. So maybe he's just rambling, you know, talking the way he talks. And he's like, oh yeah, I totally know who killed JFK. JFK, it was Sam Giancana. And hold on a second. Yeah, that's on the, what were we talking about? You're like, I could see that because he's old, really old. And so it might not be as calculated. It could just be him babbling a little bit and being like, oh, wait, that's something that we're not meant to talk about. Strike that from the record. He also said that U2 is no longer making good music. When asked why, he said, I don't know. I love Bono with all my heart, but there's too much pressure on the band. So there
I think he's losing his mind. That's just weird. I mean, I'm not saying I don't agree with him on a lot of those things. I'm just saying, what makes a person just randomly do that? I think he's going crazy.
Or, maybe you're looking at the end of your life. Maybe you're looking down, whether maybe he's sick. Maybe he just realizes that, at his age.
He's 84. I mean, he's definitely at that age where...
Mm-hmm. There's only so many years he's got left before he kicks off this mortal coil. And maybe he's looking to secure some sort of legacy and going like, remember me. And here's a reason to remember me. But I'm going to do this crazy interview. Who knows? It's a weird one. But also, on the one hand, he might be saying these things for attention. But on the other hand, does he really have a reason to lie? Like, you already got all the money in the world. You're 84 years old. Like, what could you possibly be going after at 84 years old that Quincy Jones doesn't already have? Answer?
Yeah.
Nothing. Like, so that, yeah. And look, saying Richard Pryor had sex with Marlon Brando, that was confirmed by his widow. So there is, verification of some of this stuff. It's
still, what a jerk move to out somebody like that.
You know what they call that now? You know
what do they call it?
When somebody did that to Lance Bass of NSYNC. Like they outed him online before he was ready to come out. And so now when somebody outs another person, specifically in show business, but just when somebody outs another person before they're ready to be outed or ready to come out, they call it being lanced.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. That's funny.
Yeah. So I suppose we should talk about these things that we miss because they've been replaced by technology, right?
Yes.
I suppose something that Lance Bass would miss is the days before people could out you before you're ready to be outed on the internet. But you remember back when you could make someone a mixtape or a photo collage for Valentine's Day and you were so thoughtful and that took so much time and that's all you had to do? This year, you're going to have to make them a Spotify playlist or a Facebook photo memories video. And it's really not the same. Like,
no, it's not.
It's funny because people want to, sometimes people want to buy me books like, oh, this is my favorite book. I got to buy you a copy. And I get it that they want to hand me a copy, but I hate having to lug around a book. And you know what? If they want to do something really nice, here's the hardback version. It's like, oh.
That's funny because so many people that I know that read completely disagree with you. They're like, you know what? I get it. Digital copies are the thing, but I need to feel that book in my hand. So many,
yes, and other people that give me books are like, no, you got to hold the pages in your. I think it's because like I have really bad allergies and hay fever and stuff, and sometimes like an old dusty book will literally make my hands swell up and get itchy and irritated. So like, and it took me a while. It took me a while to become accustomed to the idea of reading a book on my phone. I'm not going to lie, but I just got so bored once on a flight that I was like, there's literally no movie. There's no internet connection. I'm just going to.
Oh, so you're literally doing it on your phone. You're not using like a low light anti-glare reader or nothing like that. You're using your phone. Wow.
Yeah, no e-reader, no tablet. I just on my phone. And it took a while. It was a real leap, but now I could never go back to, and the idea of having to lug around an e-reader just to read it. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyways, a new survey asks people to name the things that have been replaced by technology that they miss the most. Here are the top 10. What do you miss, Travis? Super quick.
I miss payphones.
Interesting.
Yeah, I love payphones.
That did not make the list, but I actually kind of understand that. There's an interesting piece of nostalgia to it. Making mixtapes is in at number 1. Putting photos into an album. That's, like the idea of people in Texas still do that. Like I didn't really encounter that in New York, but when I moved to Texas, people were and still are all about scrapbooking,
Yeah, scrapbooking's a big thing. I think when I lived in Utah, it was a big thing as well because, Utah people, really wholesome family people, they're really into scrapbooking.
Yeah. And I kind of like it when I see people who've done that. And I'm into that. I think that's kind of a cool thing. Recording TV shows on your VCR. Don't miss that. Never once learned how to set the VCR properly. Would always miss my show completely or the first 10 minutes and it would drive me crazy. We'll never miss that. Do you miss that?
I don't miss it. No, I don't. Not at all.
Having printed photos around the house.
No, I don't need that.
Yeah. The excitement of seeing how the photos from a roll of film turned out. I actually do miss that one a little bit. That was fun, 9 times out of 10, they were wildly disappointing. You're like, oh, my finger's in this one. And really, it's better to have instant quality control over it. But yeah. Handwritten letters.
Nah, I don't really miss that.
Sending love letters.
No, I've never sent a love letter. I never will.
Sending postcards. Still do it. Having a pen pal. Yeah, still do it. I think some of my best pen pals are people that I talk to over Twitter and stuff like that. So I don't miss that. Buying CDs and having a CD collection. Miss the buying, don't miss the having to lug around CDs.